Good afternoon all. Thank you for attending today's Martyn's Law awareness briefing on the draft Terrorism Protection of Premises Bill. My name is Isom-Leonard and I'm a Senior Security Consultant at Buro Happold, specialising in operational risk and protective security. Today what we're looking to cover on the briefing is the who, what, when, why and how of the law, or the draft law I should say, and then a small summary as part of our conclusion. So let's open up with the why. Why is this law needed? The man on the screen is Abu al-Adnani. I'll leave you to read his quote, but Adnani was the chief strategist for the Islamic State known as IS, and he regularly released propaganda urging lone actor attacks against civilians in nations that supported the coalition against IS. He was killed in 2016, but his message continues to be the core of IS propaganda, encouraging attacks of low sophistication with the messages directed at lone actor, small cell attacks. The Director General of MI5 advised in his 2022 end-of-year update that since March 2017, MI5, security services and police have stopped 37 late-stage attack plots. 8 of those were just in 2022, 18 of which were Islamist-related, 12 extreme right-wing related, and the other 2 were left-wing, anarchist and/or single-issue terrorism. Earlier this month, we were made aware of the arrest of Matthew King, who was 20 years old, who was in the late stages of his plot. Due to the increase of extreme right-wing terrorism since 2020, MI5 have had full primacy for investigation and management of it, so it is now assessed using the same language and methodology as extreme Islamist terrorist threats and incorporated into the UK's terror threat level assessment. Pictured are a few of those who've been arrested in recent years. Terrorism as a whole is a threat without borders. Persons are radicalised and can radicalise others on an international basis, online from the seclusion of their bedroom. At any one time, there could be 2,000 to 3,000 persons of interest, known in the industry as subjects of interest, being dealt with by the National Security Services. There are over 2,000 persons who have come into contact with the authorities in recent years. These numbers show it's impossible for national security to fully protect the public from terror attacks, which is why entities, both public and private, must support where they are responsible. In 2017, the UK had more terror attacks on homeland than ever in recent times, and the methodology of the attack across them all was very common. It was unsophisticated. There has been evidence found by NATSCO and MI5 that it can take 7 days from start of self-radicalisation through to realisation for actions taken for attacks. Many of the attacks carried out on the UK by these terrorists were unpredictable and of low sophistication. However, low sophistication does not mean low impact. All of these attacks had a huge influence on national security, public confidence, hundreds, if not thousands of people's lives that were affected, as well as the deaths of 42 innocent people, the youngest of whom was 8 years old. The aim of Martyn's Law is to help reduce the number of families who have to go through what the families of the murdered and injured have experienced by making the UK better protected from terrorism and better prepared to deal with the consequences should an attack occur, all the while balancing the importance of a free and open society. It does this by creating clarity of responsibility for sites and encouraging good protective security practices. So why is it called Martyn's Law? Within the 42 people who died over that timeline, 35 were in 2017. And of that, there were 22 who died in the Manchester Arena attack. Among the 22 was a young man named Martyn Hett. He's described as a charismatic young guy who would make friends with anyone and who exemplified living life to the full. His mother is Figen Murray, pictured with him in the photo. A year after the attack, Figen went to a local theatre show, the first time she attended an event following Martyn's murder. As such, she expected things to have changed and there to have been heightened security procedures and processes in place at the venue. However, no significant changes had occurred. There were no bag searches, no ticket checks, no large bag checks, and no person searches. To quote Figen's words, it felt as if what had happened in Manchester on that fateful night had been forgotten. As part of Figen's journey to current day, she set up a parliamentary petition following her trip to her local theatre. The petition was about having better physical security measures at venues so that no one else needed to go through what her and her family had experienced. At the same time, there were several other public petitions, one of which was to bring back plastic straws to McDonald's. I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but the BBC News article shows that near the end of April, that the McDonald's petition had over 35,000 signatures, whereas Figen's petition, once it had closed, had just over 23,000. This shows the complete lack of public awareness about physical security. As Figen's description details, currently, as we sit here today, security measures at locations are discretionary to the owner and operator in accordance with their risk appetite and commercial decisions. There are no required minimum levels like we have with other life-saving measures such as fire safety and health and safety. This point was further supported by, at the time, Met Police Deputy Commissioner Lucy Dorsey, she's now Chief Constable of British Transport Police, who clearly suggested in her evidence given at the 2017 London Bridge Borough Market Coroner's Inquest, and I quote from the report, "Police working in the front line of counter-terrorism protective security would appreciate the introduction of a clear legal duty on private owners of sites to take reasonable steps to ensure protection of visitors from a terrorist attack." She contrasted the exhaustive legal duty to ensure health and safety of visitors against the lack of any comparable duty to protect from terrorism. The existence of such a duty would help the police in persuading private owners of sites to comply with recommendations to take protective action. Figen has worked with two other people, and between them, they've created a partnership for the creation of Martyn's Law. As part of the partnership, within the partnership is Nick Aldworth, who is ex-counter-terrorism police, and at retirement was the UK's counter-terrorism national coordinator for Protect and Prepare, and Brendan Cox, who is the husband of Joe Cox, the murdered MP, in campaigning for a Protect duty. Together, they wrote the Martyn's Law document, Proposed New Legislation, which has 5 key fundamentals as the foundation of legislation for all businesses to do. You can see those 5 points on the screen now. As part of the Manchester Arena attack, the coroner, for those who died, Sir John Saunders, made an application for the inquest into the deaths to become public, as he deemed that they were of substantive public interest. And the Home Secretary at the time established an independent public inquiry in October 2019 to inquire into the events leading up to and surrounding the attack that occurred on the 22nd of May 2017. The inquiry produced 3 reports. Volume 1, the security for the arena, which focused on the arena management, the security and medical provision and their management, the SIA, and the general preparedness of the arena with regards to security. Volume 2, emergency response, focused on local authority and emergency services. It concentrated on their preparedness to respond to such a major incident, as well as the actions taken and not taken on the night. Volume 3, radicalisation and preventability, focused on the UK security services in terms of identifying Abedi and his brother and the opportunities to intervene prior to the attack. The Protect duty is a recommendation from the inquiry. The report found a significant amount of missed opportunities by almost all entities involved in the approach, pre-incident and after incident. There are also major failures by almost every organisation within the report, and one of the biggest common failures across Volume 1 and Volume 2 was the understanding of responsibility to prepare for a terrorist attack, which meant that there were insufficient preparedness and the appropriate application of protection, which ultimately cost lives. So why now? There is a shifting threat. So public accessible locations, also known as PALs, continues to remain a likely target. However, this definition has widened because we now know that anywhere can be a target. Terrorist orthodoxies are persistent and they are continuously changing, and targeting is a threat actor dependent. It remains an individual choice where they're going to attack, and it cannot be predicted. There's been a significant amount of research that's occurred. It's estimated that there are 626 1,000 different organisations which may own and or operate at least one public accessible location in the UK. Of this number, 99% of those are small to medium enterprises. And of this 99%, 16% are micro entities. And these companies, owners, operators, may not have security specialists within their framework. And even the bigger ones may not have the sector specialists for either risk or security. It's also been found that without legislation, counter-terrorism engagement from organisations will be limited, as they may not see the need to comply unless they absolutely have to. More significantly, RAND Europe assessed the cost of terrorism in the UK from 2004 to 2016 and estimated the cost, both direct and indirect, to be 43.7 billion in today's money. There are several external commitments. The Conservative Manifesto commits to improving the safety and security of public venues. Also as well, it has been found that there are inconsistent applications of good practice of both corporate social responsibility and protective security when it comes to protective security, and this is further enhanced the fact that there is a lack of legal clarity with regards to responsibilities of protective security, which also includes counter-terrorism. I've mentioned that the Manchester Arena made a recommendation for protect duty as part of the inquest findings, but this also came out of Westminster Bridge, London Bridge Borough Market, and they have requested that the crowded places documentation, guidance and definition and for the criteria of that definition to be reviewed and remove the rigidity from the guidance. It has been found that the definition only covered less than 1% of actual crowded places. Hence, we now have the shift to publicly accessible locations. We now know, and it has been proven, that the pursued pillar of the government's contest strategy can fail, and as such, the other pillars need to be strengthened, hence protect duty. So who will be affected? So as part of the draft legislation, there has been 19 categories which are listed of proposed qualifying public premises. The full list of the categories are in the table. There is also something which we refer to as a premises within a premises. And as part of this, think about shopping centres where the overall shopping centre is there, but then you also have the individual premises within. For a premises to be within scope, it depends on its capacity and its accessibility. And by accessibility, we mean that the premises must be accessible to the public, or a section of the building must be accessible to the public, and must have a public capacity of 100+ people. At this time, the definition of where that capacity comes from is not clear, but it's thought that it's going to be driven by the fire regulations and or licence requirements of a premises. There are two tiers. You have a standard tier, which is between 100 and 799 in terms of capacity levels, and an enhanced tier, which is 800+. Any venue which falls below 100 will be encouraged to adopt good practice. There are special clauses for events, and we'll discuss this a little bit later on. There are premises out of scope, which actually are listed as part of the categories, and these are premises where there is already existing legislation with regards to protective security in place, i.e. airside of airports, certain areas on transport hubs, and also places of worship. However, places of worship may fall into a standard tier or even potentially an enhanced tier. Again, this is a bit of a grey area where it's being discussed, as they host an event where they are charging, so therefore they're making a commercial gain. This is outside of donations where you may go to mass or any other religious ceremony and you make a donation. That wouldn't fall in as part of the scope. If you have to attend to buy a ticket where it costs you money, that would fall into scope. Which tier at the moment is thought that it will be standard tier, because it doesn't become too arduous for the place of worship. However, this has not been decided as yet. So who will govern? There will be a national regulator. We're unsure of who this will be as yet, but their core function will be to monitor the compliance of eligible sites against legislation requirements via a network of inspectors. The size and shape of the regulator will be based on an approach of other national inspection regimes, such as the Health and Safety Executive and Food Standards Agency. It's anticipated the regulator will inspect between 3 to 5% of sites under scope per annum. The operational approach is probably going to be regionally based, with an inspection regime operating on a sliding scale from offering advice and guidance, and in worst case situations, enforcement and sanctions. The regulator will have several legal powers to fully exercise, including power of entry, power to access all areas, power to obtain data and documents, and power to interview your staff and contractors. There will be a difference in terms of regulation between the standard tier and the enhanced tier. It's thought that the standard tier will be on a reactive basis, probably via reports of concern from the staff and public, and the enhanced tier will be both a proactive and reactive basis. So what is required as it stands right now as part of the draft legislation? So there are some commonalities and there are some differences, but each business within that falls into the scope of the legislation will be required to register with the regulator. Each business will require a person responsible to register themselves, and as well as the business, with the regulator. Now, this person responsible can be an entity or it can be an individual. So it's very similar to that of the regulatory reform fire safety order, which some of you may be familiar with. This person must ensure that they have registered the premises with the regulator, but they also ensure that terrorism training in relation to the premises or event is provided to relevant workers as soon as reasonably practicable. So what do we mean by relevant worker? This is someone who works at the premises or event, has responsibilities to the premises or event, and or their work has some form of connection with the premises event. For this person responsible, it is thought that they're probably going to be the competent person at work, and NATSCO are making a level 3 competent person at work training course. The contents of this course has yet to be decided, and any details have not been confirmed or clarified, but it's thought that it's going to be a 5-day entry level, and there will also be, to complement this, a register of specialist competent persons, so those who have been within the industry for a significant amount of time, significant memberships and experience as well. So this is over and above the level 3 competent person. For both standard and enhanced tiers, there must be a documented and formal, and by formal we mean signed, review of either the evaluation or risk assessment that the legislation requires in relation to terrorism. And this review must occur at a minimum of every 12 months of the date of the current documentation. Now, this is very different from a lot of other legislation which requires assessments or documentation, because it says that other legislation says that it must be reviewed regularly, whereas this very clearly dictates it must be reviewed within 12 months. In addition to this, the person responsible will also be required to cooperate. This may be not only with the regulator, it may also be, if they are a premises within a premises, they'll need to cooperate with their neighbours, as well as other agencies such as blue light services, local authorities, etc. So let's look at the standard tier specifically. So for premises to qualify, they must have a capacity between 100 and 799. Again, this is based on the official capacity levels of the venue or premises or event, not, well, we only have 40 people turn up normally. It doesn't matter about how many people normally turn up. If your premises can hold more than 100 people and less than 800 people, you will fit within the standard tier scope. There must be a person responsible, and this person responsible for the standard tier must ensure that a standard terrorism evaluation for the premises has been done, and that it's reviewed once there's a material change, a change to the use of premises, and on an annual basis, as we've discussed. It must be revised to ensure it's up to date, and it must ensure that a current copy of the current evaluation is made available for every individual who uses the premises as a place of work. So the standard terrorism evaluation, there's currently a draft template and guidance notes that was released a couple of weeks ago by the Home Office. And this template requires any venue, premises within the standard tier to think, plan and activate. So when you're thinking about terrorism, what it wants you to understand, what it wants you to do is understand the threat from terrorism. It has 4 questions to prompt you to give answers, and this will enable you to complete that section. So things such as like, if you had to evacuate, where would you evacuate to? If you had to lock down your premises, how would you lock it down? So the answers draw up, so the questions draw out the answer in order for the evaluation to be completed. It then asks you to complete a 6-step task plan. By completing these tasks, again, there are questions that will extract the answers. You will be able to complete that section, and you will then have an evaluation terrorism plan. It then asks you to activate it, so put the plan into action, communicate it. So this ensures that the answers are documented and provides guidance of how and when to share the supporting actions needed for the evaluation to be effective. So as we've said, you need to communicate. You need to communicate the plan to all those persons who work at the premises, as well as your neighbours, and also you might need to communicate it with the regulator. You must make sure that your staff have your relevant staff have the appropriate terrorism training. And as we've said, you will also need to work with your regulator by providing a copy of the current evaluation within a reasonable period of the regulator's request. The enhanced tier. So the enhanced tier, again for qualification, is the capacity of the premises must be over 800. So to re-emphasise, it's the official capacity levels, not the numbers who normally use it. The person responsible has all the responsibilities of the standard tier, but also ensuring that a terrorism risk assessment of the premises has been completed. Now, this is the distinct difference between the standard tier and the enhanced tier. The standard tier requires an evaluation, whereas the enhanced tier requires a terrorism risk assessment of the premises to be completed. At this point in time, there hasn't been any guidance with regards to what that risk assessment requires. The draft legislation states that the assessment is to be reviewed annually, which we've discussed, and whenever there is a material change to the premises. And it's the draft legislation gives a very specific term with regards to material, and it's advised that you refer back to or come and have a conversation with us in terms of what that definition is. You must ensure that the assessment is also kept up to date. The person responsible for the enhanced tier must also have a designated senior officer, and this person is declared to the regulator with their contact details, including any changes of the person or their details. It can be the same person if the person responsible is an individual. If the person responsible is an entity, the designated senior officer must be a physical human being. This DSO must be a person with responsibility within the business. They must coordinate the counter-terrorism risk assessment of the premises. They must prepare and maintain the security plan, which we'll discuss shortly, and they must coordinate the response of any communication or notice from the regulator. And as I've said, there must be a security plan, which we will discuss later. And this is the responsibility of the designated senior officer, but ultimately the person responsible must ensure that the security plan is in place and it's fit for purpose as well, as they are the ones who are legally responsible for ensuring the adherence to the legislation. So public events. So to be a qualifying public event within the scope of the legislation, it must be an event of 800 plus people, and access to the event for members of the public must be by express permission, whether or not payment is involved, because this implies that there's a control of entry and or a physical boundary for that event. There must again be a person responsible, and the person responsible is the one who has control of the premises at which the event is to be held in connection with the use of the event. So if people hold events at your venue, at your premises, the responsibility remains with the venue, but cooperation by the event organizer, or operator, whomever it may be, is required. The person responsible must also ensure that a terrorism risk assessment for the event has occurred at least 3 months in advance of the date of the event, or where, if it's less than 3 months, where the date has been made first available to the public or a section of the public if there's early release of tickets for a particular group, fan group, etc. If it's less than 3 months before the start of the event. And that must be done as soon as reasonably practicable after the details are first made public and before the event begins. The regulator must be notified of the event by the person responsible at least 3 months in advance or directly after the event is publicised before the event. The event must have a designated senior officer who is responsible for the coordination and maintenance of the CT risk assessment and security plans, including the counter-terrorism plan, both the preparation and incident management. The security plan matches the criteria of that of the enhanced tier, and we'll discuss the requirements shortly. So the legislation prescribes what the terrorism risk assessment must have, but at the moment it doesn't discuss in depth exactly what it must look like, whereas the standard tier enhanced, they've actually provided a template, and you complete the template, and that template provides you your plan and enhanced evaluation, your standard tier evaluation. So the terrorism risk assessment of enhanced duties and or qualifying public events are an assessment of the types of the acts of terrorism most likely to occur at or in the immediate vicinity of the premises or event, should an act of terrorism occur. Once we know the types of acts that may occur, we must identify security measures which are reasonable in the reduction of risk should an act of terrorism occur within the immediate vicinity or at the venue itself or event. Additionally, reasonably practicable measures that might reduce the risk of physical harm to individuals should a terrorist attack occur in and around the immediate vicinity. And this could be physical security measures such as barriers and gates, fences, CCTV, etc. But this could also be policies and procedures. So it doesn't mean that you have to spend tens of thousands of pounds. It could just be, we're going to have a policy that no one can bring bags, or no one can bring bags over the size of an A4 sheet of paper. That in itself, that by introducing that policy, you are reducing the risk of physical harm. Considerations for the assessment are the size and other characters of the premises or event, existing measures already in place, current and future use of the premises for enhanced tiers, and for qualifying events, the nature of the event. So the security plan. What is the security plan requirements, or what are the security plans requirements, I should say? The person responsible must ensure that a security plan is in place for an enhanced tier premises or qualifying event, and the plan must be related to the premises or event. So using your old workplaces or your last event or even your neighbours and just doing Control H for a name change is not appropriate, and it's not fit for purpose. The plan must be prepared appropriately by a competent person. It must also be maintained. You must have a current copy provided to the regulator as soon as reasonably practicable following the completion of the plan and or revision of the plan or the counter-terrorism risk assessment. And that must just be done, or there's also if it is requested by the regulator itself. The contents of the plan must set out information about your premises or event, information about the person responsible, the identity and contact details of the DSO, so the designated senior officer, the arrangements and details of the information about the counter-terrorism risk assessment, the details of security measures to mitigate risks, including proposed measures, details of terrorism protection training provided, and any other relevant details. So what are the sanctions? We're going to ignore everything the law requires. What happens if I ignore everything? So we've spoken about the potential powers of the regulator. So for the first step, it wouldn't necessarily be to penalise. It's to provide advice and guidance, again, very similar to that of the regulatory fire safety order. After that, the regulator may issue compliance notices, and the compliance notices will require organisations to take steps deemed necessary to address these non-compliances. If non-compliances still continue, there will be monetary penalties. Now, this removes the appetite for the acceptance of non-compliance. And for standard tiers, we're looking at about £10,000, it's saying, or £500 per day for failure to rectify non-compliances. For the enhanced tiers, it's £18 million, or 5% of worldwide turnover, And if there are continued failures, it's 1% of worldwide turnover per day for failure to rectify any non-compliances. Further to that, the regulator can impose temporary restrictions to premises or events to close it or part of it to the public until sufficient measures are taken to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. And in worst case scenarios, and for those of the most serious of breaches, there can be criminal sanctions, which may include up to 2 years imprisonment. However, it must be stressed that the regulator is not there to catch people out. This law is not here the premise of the law is not here to catch people out. It's to provide guidance and explanations in how to make your site, your event more safe and secure for yourself, your staff, and your visitors. But persistent failures and/or adherence to give guidance and sanctions, persistent failures and/or adherence to given guidance will result in sanctions. So what's the financial impact? As part of the draft legislation, the government did a financial impact, and it's anticipated that the cost will be £2,000 for a standard tier venue and approximately £80,000 for an enhanced tier venue. What may change is the government. As we know, we've got a general election next year, and this, as we've discussed, is part of the Tory manifesto. However, there's been no formal comment from Labour. For months and months, unfortunately, there have been cowboys in the security industry. And people have said, we can make you Protect Duty compliant. People have actually registered Protect Duty Limited as their company name. Hence the drive from everyone involved within the legislation to move away from use of Protect Duty to Martyn's Law. And actually, there's been no mention of Protect in the actual bill. There is a query over the competence qualification being made, and this is why further details have not been released. The level 3 qualification is equivalent to an A level on the Ofqual comparison scale. So this is what's being discussed. Is this enough to make someone a competent person with regards to counter-terrorism? So what is the financial impact of terrorism? Why do we need to do this? So Lord Toby Harris, in his London Preparedness report of 2022, detailed research from Paul Ree that the UK's largest terrorism, from Paul Ree, who are the UK's largest terrorism reinsurer, and they found that an incident which isn't related to terrorism but causes mass public panic can cost approximately £2 million. An example of this is the stampede that occurred on the last Saturday in November in 2017 on Oxford Street, which actually started with 2 males having a bit of a punch-up on the platform of the central line of Oxford Circus Station, and this escalated to reports of a marauding gunman on Oxford Street, which caused shops to lock down. This was further exacerbated by tweets by Ollie Murs, and I've put a screenshot on the screen there, who was in Selfridges at the time, and he himself had to be taken into a back room as part of the lockdown. So this caused shops to lock down. There was mass self-evacuation because people followed the run, hide, tell message that has been given out. So we had mass self-evacuation for those on the street. And unfortunately 15 people became injured as part of this. So this occurred over sort of a somewhere between 20 minutes and 40 minutes where this lockdown occurred. We had blue light services turn up, and it cost £2 million. Should a natural event happen, and again Paul Ree had provided some details on this, and they did one related to an explosive event, it's likely to cost £50 million, as it causes significant long-term disruption in the area as rebuild is required, and also the impact on tourism within the local area vicinity where the incident occurs. However, this doesn't actually take into account any civil actual compensation, and in the future, once the legislation is enacted, any future criminal prosecutions and fines and any legal fees, etc. So when is this going to come into play? So I was very lucky to hear Nick Aldworth speak a couple of weeks ago, and this is what he thinks that the timeline may look like. Now, this is a thought. This isn't what at 100% is going to happen, but we're probably looking about 18 months until we get to royal assent, and approximately 2 years from actual enactment. So what we mean by the implementation period is your grace period between royal assent. It is now legislation, and you now have this time to make yourself compliant with the legislation. Things that may delay it, so changes once it enters Parliament so not only Parliament, it also needs to go to the House of Lords. Then changes may take place, things may be added in, things may be taken out, and this needs to be agreed. As I've mentioned, we also have a general election next year, so a change of party may cause a delay, but it may also speed it up. Not quite sure. So again, this is a rough guideline in terms of a timeline. So how can you prepare? So the first and foremost is be in the know. Someone senior in your organisation needs to read the draft bill. It's not arduous. However, it's important to know what may be legally expected of you. Know your threat levels. Today, the threat level for terrorism is substantial, which means that an attack is likely. However, that is the national threat level. It's important for you to consider your own site's or your own event's threat level in line with its activities and also the activities in and around it, i.e. those of your neighbours, immediate as well as beyond. Get your assessments done. This could be an in-house person doing it or an external person doing it, but it should be done by someone who understands physical security, understands threats, vulnerabilities and risks in relation to physical security. Just as you would with food safety and health and safety and fire safety, you would use a person who knows about that subject matter. Once the assessments are done, action them. Reduce the risk and threat level and exposure to your site or event. Your neighbour's plan, as we've discussed, or your last workplace plan will not be fit for purpose at your current site. Your site plan must be specific and relevant to your site's threats. By doing an assessment by a competent person, this may also reduce your terrorism insurance premiums, dependent on who your insurer is. And this has been discussed by Paul Ree as well. So start also thinking about your general security, incident and emergency plans. Or do you even have any? If you do, when were they last actually fully reviewed by a competent person? When were they last tested? Remember, terrorism is a crime. So by reviewing your entire security strategy, plans, policies, procedures, etc., this will actually help against all crime, not only counter-terrorism. Training. So get yourself and your staff trained. There is freely available counter-terrorism training for everyone. Get as many people as you can within your organisation trained. But also, don't just stop there. Think about the first aid training. Does anyone at your site have catastrophic bleed training? Do you have tourniquets in your first aid kit or your grab bag? And if you do people actually know how to use them? Do people know how to just fashion a tourniquet if no actual equipment is available, i.e. an actual tourniquet? If you're if you are an event venue or an event area, don't just think of your event days. Think of your dark days as well. Incidents such as Forbury Gardens and Streatham High Street were on standard days. Nothing particularly special happening in the area to pinpoint why those attacks occurred on those dates and times. And your competence as suppliers. If you outsource your security provision, understand what they do and how they do it. Just by having a guarding company doesn't tick the box for protective security. What are the staff doing and why? If outsourced, who manages them? If your guarding manager is part of your guarding company, will they provide a true report reflecting the status of your protective security, including guarding, or will they provide the status of what their employer wants them to? So as part of that, who audits them? Who checks the reports that they complete, and not just after an incident? This should be part of your day-to-day activity, not just knee-jerk after an incident has occurred. So how can I find resources? There are a significant amount of free resources available out there, and Protect UK and NATSCO, the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office, is one. So Protect UK is free from NATSCO. It's a NATSCO resource and provides guidance, intelligence and reports specific to counter-terrorism, but also elements of protective security. It is both app and web-based. ACT training, ACT training, is free counter-terrorism training written by NATSCO, and it takes approximately 45 minutes to complete. There is also ACT operational and ACT strategic for more senior persons within organisations. The NPSA is the National Protective Security Authority, and it's the government's national technical authority for physical and personnel protective security. They have a significant library of guidance to help businesses understand the range of threats faced and what can be done to minimise risks through daily operations. Paul Ree has lots of free advice and updates with regards to counter-terrorism and Martyn's Law. Scan training. Scan training by the MPSA has been developed to help businesses empower staff to identify suspicious activity and know what to do when they encounter it. There are 6 modules delivered by qualified trainers, and it is free. Engage with your CTSA. CTSA stands for your Counter-Terrorism Security Advisor. They will be linked to your local police force of your event or your site, so please ensure that you reach out to them. And contact your local authority for the details of their emergency planning team. They will hold a local business resilience forum, normally quarterly, and by going, you'll start to build on those interoperability relationships with emergency services, volunteer and aid organisations, faith leaders, and you'll learn from other neighbouring organisations about their experiences from incidents, both major and minor, and get updates from blue light services with regards to your site or event locality. As mentioned, there's going to be a requirement to cooperate with others, so start this cooperation and interoperability now. Talk to your neighbours, whether they're in the same building or next door. As Bob Hope said, it's good to talk. And if absolutely nothing else, go back to the 5 fundamentals from the legislation proposal. So look at those 5 points and look to see how you can start to implement them as part of your day-to-day. So how can Buro Happold help? We are specialists in what we do. This right-hand side shows a snip from the MPSA website, working with security professionals. And our team have RSES registered professionals, as well as those with memberships at the Security Institute, from fellow through to associate. We have chartered security professionals, and many of the team also sit on the register of the Association of Security Consultants. We have experts who deal with master planning and concept design, technical aspects of protective security, including electronic, through to the operational application, management, tender panel specialists, and the strategic planning and compliance of the operational aspect. The breadth and depth of our security consulting discipline team is unparalleled. We can help with the achievement of accreditation such as Secure by Design, Secured Environments, SABRE, ACS, BS 16000 certification, amongst many. Whilst at this time, these do not give you the gold tick for compliance to the draft bill or the bill once it becomes enacted, an already established security risk framework will help you to implement any further requirements of the bill once enacted into law. It's better to build upon something than start from scratch. We are entirely independent. We do not provide any frontline services or products, so we remain completely impartial to any and all service providers. We can be security specialists on tender panels, carry out audits on contractors, CCTV, access control, guarding. We can carry out gap analysis on what's needed for legislative requirements, both physical and electronic, as an outsourced independent. As mentioned, many entities do not have a senior security specialist and have the guarding company provide the security management. Will they be working on your behalf or the behalf of their employer? We're on the Crown Commercial Supplier Framework, CCS, so currently work with many government departments and local authorities. We also work with a significant amount of private entities as well, including landowners, developers, stadiums, buildings and arenas. Given the depth of our consulting services within Buro Happold, we are able to provide clients. We are able to work hand in hand with many other disciplines under our roof, such as crowd dynamics, fire safety, accessibility, transport, and many, many more. One thing we're very proud of as part of our security consulting discipline is our operational risk and protective security golden thread. Post Grenfell, Dame Judith Hackett set the precedence of creating a golden thread for fire safety and building safety. The golden thread in that context is a way of ensuring that all documentation is in place between the construction and ongoing maintenance of each building, and this was made digitised. What we have done is not as complex as it has to apply to the standard tier venues as well as the enhanced ones. So digital is not always possible. However, the application of the principle is. We have created a golden thread of protective security and risk management from strategy to frontline application. And the purpose is for businesses to understand the physical security risks that they are exposed to and enhances preparedness for both pre and post incident management. This is a word of warning. As the legislation is making its way through the houses, no one right now knows what the end legislation will look like. The legislative scope may be reduced or it may be widened. There are plenty of discussions happening behind ministerial doors. So please avoid the snake oil salesman who says they will make you compliant now, because this is absolutely not possible. So conclusion. Hopefully you'll agree we've touched upon the who, the what, the when, the why, and the how. There are 5 reports on this slide, and all relate to safety, security, or both. There are many more out there, and there are also many more out there. They are put on the screen in no particular order, but I've put on the slide direct quotes from the summaries of these inquiries, and reading them blindly, you cannot know which quote belongs to what report. However, unfortunately, a lot of the words ring the same from one to the other. We must learn, we must improve, we must change. Actions and events and decisions should have been different. The training should have been better. This should have been exercised. Communication was poor. Communication should have been better. Preparation for major disasters should have been better. No matter what industry you work in, your work will be touched by one or all of the recommendations of these reports. To improve, businesses must build a framework of what I refer to the holy trinity of operational risk and protective security, which is risk, security, and safety. Remember, being ignorant to the problem will not get you out of trouble. Your staff not knowing what to do is not an excuse, and this is vicarious liability. Section 2 to 4 of the Health and Safety at Work Act continues to exist, and it requires businesses to ensure the safety of visitors at sites from foreseeable risks, of which terrorism is one. Aside from that, any civil cases will draw upon the learnings and recommendations from inquiries, and there must be a justification as to why you haven't applied certain recommendations at your site or event. To quote Sir John Saunders from the Manchester Arena Inquiry Volume 1 recommendation, doing nothing is not an option. I'm just going to play a very quick video here, and this video is from the Home Office, and I think it surmises Martyn's Law quite well.
There's not a day, not a moment in the day when I don't miss him. In fact, I have a Martyn-shaped hole in my soul. What happened in Manchester, losing Martyn to a terrorist attack, was life-changing. I'm sure every other family who lost a loved one that day would say exactly the same.
For the last few years, we've seen 15 or so terrorist incidents across the United Kingdom, and sadly, each of them has created enormous pain and suffering for individuals. And we can reduce that, can't eliminate it, but we can reduce it by being better prepared. Martyn's Law is about helping people to be better prepared so that should the worst happen, we can respond better and protect more people.
We know that we can reduce the harm caused to the public by protective security. We can deter terrorists and ensure that when terrorist attacks take place, that there are mitigations which will save lives, and that is encapsulated in Martyn's Law.
Martyn's Law is most definitely not meant to be a punitive measure. It is there to keep people safe, but it is very much offered as a proportionate legislation, which means that the smaller venues are not required to spend lots of money.
So we're going to make sure that this is not a burden on businesses. The reality is it doesn't have to be. It's just about thinking ahead. And Figen has already demonstrated the way she's worked with some businesses around the country that you can actually prepare very simply in only a few hours to make sure that should the worst happen, staff can be absolutely prepared to know what they should be doing and how they should react.
We're all inspired by and motivated by the experiences of victims and survivors, and having seen the consequences of terrorist attacks, really determined to work with the public, work with business, work with government to ensure we have a set of tools which prevent other families experiencing those tragedies.
I just feel so strongly about this legislation because nobody should be in danger when they're out and about, and if Martyn's Law can deter people if they see security at the door, if Martyn's Law helps making people feel safer when they're out and about, all of that is worthwhile.
In that video, the word prepare or prepared was said 4 times and inferred twice in just over 2 minutes. And that is what this bill is about. It's about making your site or area of responsibility proportionately prepared versus the security risks it faces, so that it is not an attractive target for hostile actors. Also, should an incident occur, your staff will then be appropriately prepared and aware of what to do. As Nick Aldworth said at the Home Affairs Select Committee, it could be as simple as someone calling out, "Get away from the windows, get behind the bar, follow me." Nick said this following first-hand feedback of a survivor from the London Bridge Borough Market attack, Natalie Tate, who said she felt as though the business she was in during the attack could have done better. It is not to be a blocker, because when we are out and about, or our friends and family are out and about, we want to know that the building, premises or event that they are going to have done all they can in order to keep us and them safe, so that the likelihood of a terror incident occurring is mitigated against and more families do not have to go through such turmoil. I'll end with a final paragraph from Figen's foreword from the Martyn's Law proposal. Martyn's Law is not going to stop terrorism. Nothing can do that. But I do hope that if the government legislates for Martyn's Law, then it will mean simple, common sense security will make it much harder to inflict mass casualties, and fewer people will have to suffer what I and the parents of the other 21 bereaved families of Manchester have had to endure. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions?
Yeah. So someone first is asked, does this apply to private events, e.g. staff, office parties, etc., or is it only in public spaces?
So at this moment, in terms of events, it's that control of entry and a physical boundary. So currently, right now, as the legislation stands, the law will only require if there is a physical boundary to your event and or a form of control of entry. So at the Home Affairs Select Committee, Nick Aldworth discussed, say, markets as an example. You can just walk through a market, and technically at the moment this falls out of the legislation, but a market has a defined area. Whilst there isn't a physical boundary, it does have a defined area. I've used markets. I know it's not necessarily an event, but just to use that, just to get the picture in your mind. So you can walk through it, but you could have that as say a farmer's market or just a placemaking event, which a lot of landowners do as part of their marketing. They just put placemaking events across their land, which may not necessarily have a physical boundary, but they have. And so this is what is also being discussed as part of the widening of the scope. Unfortunately, at this moment in time, the legislation that states right now says there must be a control of entry. There must be expressed permission, whether it's paid or not, and there must be a physical boundary. So hopefully I've answered that question. We did have a couple of other questions submitted prior to. The first one was, does the legislation go far enough? As I've mentioned, that there is currently talk about extension of scope to include other areas such as markets or just general open air events. There's also thought to make Martyn's Law part of a planning condition, as it's more expensive to do things retrospectively. So if it's part of the planning and it's part of a planning condition, then it is inbuilt within an environment. The legislation isn't perfect in its current state, but it's better than what we currently have, which is nothing. And the scope extent, as I've mentioned, is currently being discussed, which is why no one is able to say that you can currently comply. We also have a question about competent persons. So what might be the requirements? At the moment, it is the level 3 NATSCO qualification, which is talking about the competent person. You can go onto the Protect UK website and you can find out a little bit more about that because it is a NATSCO driven qualification, so they are the best people to go to get that information. However, there will be a specialist security competent person register for those who are RSES registered, chartered members and or fellows potentially of the Security Institute. Again, what that register will look like is unknown at this point in time. We had a question about what will Martyn's Law mean for local authorities. Local authorities must have a plan of what to do should a terror attack occur within its jurisdiction. They must support training, testing and exercising, not only of private businesses, but also the blue light services as well as any volunteer or aid organisations. And it must be on the local authority risk register and be actively worked upon for any other mitigation. We had one last question, which was how does or will Martyn's Law affect other sectors outside of sports and events? So Martyn's Law is much more than just sports and events. It touches on retail. If you go back to the in Schedule 1 of the draft legislation, it lists all of the premises which would fall into scope, which includes retail, education, health. So if you think about hospitals, whilst there are access control areas in hospital, A&E, anyone can walk into A&E, and if that area can hold up to 100 people, it's going to fall within the standard tier. So remember, it doesn't necessarily mean your entire site. If part of your site will allow you to, will allow the public to just walk in or have access to it, that will fall into the scope if it can hold over 100 people. Is there anything we can do today to prepare for the bill? 100% there is. My first thing I would say is get anyone who can spare 45 minutes to do the ACT awareness training. It is free counter-terrorism training. And actually, as I say, counter-terrorism is a crime. And by doing any form of counter-terrorism training, you're actually making your business and your personnel more security aware. So things such as the power of hello. If you think someone's acting a bit odd in and around your area, just by saying, good afternoon, you seem a little bit lost. Can we help you? Hello, can I help you? Not only are you saying to that person, we've noticed you, you're also providing a customer service aspect. So if they're not a terrorist, they'll say, yes, I'm actually really lost. I don't know where the nearest cash machine is, or I don't know where the nearest toilet is. And then you can help them on that. If they are a bad girl or bad guy, then they will think, oh, this isn't the place to come because they were on me quite quickly. And they'll think, because bad guys normally come to the site beforehand and do what's known as hostile reconnaissance, and this is all part of the training. So I really recommend that you Google ACT awareness trainers, ACT awareness training, and get anyone within your organisation to complete that training. Look at your plans, look at your procedures. You can reach out to specialists, you can reach out to us. And we will be happy to help where we can, but there are a significant amount of free resources available. We are going to be releasing, for all those who have attended, and registered, we are going to be releasing a white paper a bit later on this week, which will help to summarise what has been spoken about on the slides. So I think we're pretty much coming up to one last. What are the phases of the law? And how, if at all, will venues be held to account? So this will be done via the regulator. The regulator in this, it's been discussed by both Figen, Tom Nugent, and Nick Aldworth, that the regulator will not be coming out with an iron stick saying, you haven't complied, here's a fine, you haven't complied, here's a fine. It's about providing that guidance, because we want people to comply in order, not through fear of sanctions, but actually because we want people and entities to protect the public. So it will be through guidance, it will be through education, there'll be plenty of courses and workshops, there'll be plenty of documentation which is released by gov.uk. So it's important to follow these legitimate areas of media so that you get the most up-to-date information. But then also, as I say, once that register of specialist security people are released, you can go to them, go onto the MPSA website, go onto the NATSCO website as well, Protect UK. I think that's it for questions. But just as a quick final, because we've now hit the hour mark, I just want to say thank you very much for everyone for attending. I know a couple of people have had to jump off a little bit early, but thank you very much. I hope you found it informative. And if you'd like any further information, my contact details were on the last slide, but as I mentioned, we will be releasing a white paper later this week with a summary of the slides, and our contact details will be on there. So please do feel free to reach out should you require any further information or clarification. Thank you very much all. Have a great day.